All right, welcome to week 2 of the Inside Blitz podcast with David Roy, as always. I'm Mike Peters. We're your play-by-play hosts for the regular games, and now we're doing a podcast every Monday at 6 p.m. We're a little bit late today. We apologize for that, but hopefully you guys all are going to get caught up and enjoy what we're doing. So we'll start off by going over last week's games, kind of recapping. We'll start with the first game on the slate, which was Boise and Auburn. Boise took the win 31-17, but they fought off a valiant comeback from Auburn in the second half, or in the fourth quarter mostly. Auburn was down 31-3 going into the fourth quarter. They scored 14 points, were a turnover away and like 3 minutes away from making that a 7-point game. Boise was able to hold on to it. Boise turned it over once, almost turned it over twice in that fourth quarter. So it definitely made it interesting. And the game turned out a little bit closer than most of that game was. So key takeaways from that game, David. Boise pretty much dominated outside of the late run from Auburn. What did you take away from it? What were the things to look at from that one and going forward for both teams?
I think the one thing that Boise kind of looks at that and they kind of say, we can't really afford to kind of give up a late run. However, when you're up that big going into the fourth quarter, I guess, giving up a late comeback attempt isn't too bad as long as you can hold off that comeback attempt. I think the one thing for Auburn, though, is, we mentioned that they had that 14-point fourth quarter. They just got to figure out a way to get going earlier and maintain that throughout the entirety of the game, as opposed to, getting started so late in the game. We saw that kind of against Iowa, too. They had a slow start, and then they managed to get going later on to come back and win that. So I think the big thing that they just need to do is get Blake Moon going early, get everything set up the right way early, and just maintain that going forward.
I think it's a good point about Auburn. That Iowa game, they didn't do anything in that game until the fourth quarter either. And then Blake Moon put together 2 drives right at the end of that game. They wound up winning. And same thing happened against Boise, is they didn't have anything going, and they put together something late in the fourth quarter. But you're right, they're going to have to turn their things around a little bit to get going. The funny thing is too, going back and looking at that, offensively they were very close. Boise had 403 yards offense. Auburn had 360. Their plays were almost identical, so obviously Boise a little bit more yards per play. The big things that stood out to me when looking at that, Boise had 7 sacks to Auburn's 4. Auburn turned the ball over 3 times to 1 for Boise, and Auburn had 4 penalties for 45 yards to 1 for 5. So those 3 things, I think, were the biggest difference in that game: the turnovers, the sacks, and the penalties. So if Auburn can turn those things around, I think they can be in that game, because we saw that they could move the ball late. They avoid those issues early on, and I think things turn around for them. Any other final notes or anything about that game before we move on?
Well, you mentioned the 7 sacks and, Auburn's 3 turnovers and, their 4 penalties, and all of those things play into their third down percentage. They only convert about, 40% of the time. If they can get those 3 things cleaned up, I think you're going to see that a little bit closer to what Boise's number was, which was 57% at the time in terms of third down conversions. So, those things matter in terms of getting drives continued and put together. So they're very important.
One other thing to add on that too is, actually, never mind. My point was not going to be pertinent. I was thinking of something else. So we'll move on from that one. So the second game of the day, the second game on Thursday was Tennessee and Notre Dame. Now this game was interesting because Tennessee came in 0-2. They had played 2 close games, but we didn't really know what to expect from them. Their defense looked great in the first week, not as much in the second week as they lost to Florida State. Didn't know what to expect. Tennessee's defense came out, played great the whole game, kept them in that game. They had a chance to win the game late. Some questionable play calling, very safe play calling at the end of the fourth. They wound up going to overtime. Notre Dame's defense steps up, forces a field goal. Notre Dame then scores a touchdown to win it. So Kyle Miller actually looked really good in that game. Was 29 of 45 for 305 yards, had a touchdown and a pick. He did get sacked 7 times, which is more a testament, I think, to the plays overall. But he stepped up. He didn't have the errors that we saw early on, where a lot of his completions were dropped interceptions. Just had the one pick, which wasn't even that bad. It was a pick at the back of the end zone. So overall, he looked pretty good. Defensively, Terrence Mitchell was great. Had 13 tackles, had a forced fumble, just missed out on a Player of the Week nomination. Caleb Tuiasosopo, we actually put in on the Player of the Week vote. He had 7 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss and a sack, and he also forced 2 fumbles. And he was a huge reason for Tennessee staying in that game. Offensively, Ty White for Notre Dame, 24-35, only 134 yards. Did have two touchdowns and no interceptions, but really kind of struggled to get anything going offensively. Had 28 carries for 108 yards rushing. David Woods, another good game, 18 carries, 98 yards. Gage Bodine, 4 catches, only 38 yards. They're still having a hard time getting him involved in the offense. And that probably led to only the 19 points in the game. Defensively for them, Devontae Griffin, 5 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss and a sack. Lorenzo Vasquez, 6 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, which were also 3 sacks. Antoine Curry had his second interception of the season. So good performances on both sides of the ball for both of those teams. Great performance overall from Tennessee. They just missed out. They've got 3 losses, all by 3 points or less. What were your takeaways on that one, David?
I think the big thing is they kind of they figured out how to get Kyle Miller rolling, and that's very important for the success of this offense. We saw Mitchell Kennedy get involved, 16 carries, 49 yards. It's not the greatest stat line in the world. It's not the worst either. It's pretty decent because it helped Kyle Miller out and set things up. But I think the one thing for Tennessee that they kind of need to figure out is third down. They converted about 18% of the time. Notre Dame had 7 sacks. Tennessee had 6. So Tennessee's defense obviously is in a very good spot. Considering the fact that they held Notre Dame to under 20 points. When we go back the past 2 weeks, they went a little bit over that. So they kept them around that 20-point set. Tennessee kind of struggled to get moving, but that's something that we kind of expected against this Notre Dame secondary. But they found ways to, keep themselves in it. For a while there, they had the lead. Notre Dame just ended up engineering a pretty good comeback. So their record is 0-3. But they don't look like an 0-3 team after what they just managed to do to a Notre Dame team.
Yeah, I think Tennessee very easily could be 3-0, if not 2-1. Being 0-3, I mean, they're right in it. It sucks that they're 0-3 because they have a long road to climb to try to get back into position for the playoff. But they've been on the bad ends or on the wrong end of some bad luck and kind of. Had some things not go their way, but they've been in those games. So, 2-1, yeah, I would say 2-1 actually, because Boise, that game wasn't really that close. But the last 2 weeks, they've been right in it. They've had an opportunity, they just haven't capitalized. So, we'll see things turn around for them. Notre Dame, they've seen, a little bit more mortal. Obviously, they got the 1 loss on their record, but they looked really good against Hawaii, and then they fell last week to Boise, and then they bounced back this week to Tennessee. But Tennessee was able to stick with them, able to slow down the offense. Going into the week, Notre Dame, the best offense in the league, and Tennessee held them in check. So we know that the Tennessee defense that we saw in week 1 against Boise, who is one of the top 2 offenses, they've done it twice. They've shut down 2 of the top offenses in the league. So the Tennessee defense is legit. They just got to get their offense figured out. I think the offense looked a lot better in that game. Still aren't quite where they want to be, but they're getting close. So Tennessee's going to be a tough team down the stretch. Still got an opportunity to try to make it into playoff contention. You never know if they go on a run. But even if they don't, they're going to make some noise, I think, and maybe knock 1 or 2 teams out of the playoffs. So we'll definitely see how that one plays out. We'll go on to the next game, Florida State and Iowa. This was the first game on Saturday. Florida State, I would say, kind of controlled most of the game. We were looking for Iowa to come out. I think we both predicted Iowa winning in that one. We knew Florida State bounced back last week and got the win against Tennessee, but we weren't sure if that was a product of Tennessee not looking that great or if Florida State really rebounding from that 31-3 loss to Ohio State in week 1. They came out, kind of dominated that game. They led in plays 86-68. They led in offense 381 to 323. They had a fourth down conversion, which was really big for them. They actually had three of their four trips to the red zone. They scored touchdowns on. So overall, they looked pretty good offensively. They just did more. Michael Kovac was just an animal the whole game. 35 carries, 147 yards, a touchdown. Also had 8 receptions for 73 yards and another touchdown. Elias Gonzalez continues to look efficient, if not spectacular. 23-35, 193, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. So he was very involved in that offense. Brandon Colvin had a sack for the defense. Jack Frost had 7 tackles and a pick. Trevor Golinar had a nice game, 5 catches for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also had 5 returns for 140 yards on kick returns. So very active for that game. Iowa had Justin Meese came out just chunking the ball around, 55 pass attempts, went 29-55, 266, 2 touchdowns and a pick. I think Iowa's still being a little bit more conservative. Maybe Meese is choosing to be more conservative. 55 pass attempts. You'd like to see more than 266 yards. But he did fling the ball around. Devontae Earlycutt had 8 carries for 59 yards and 8 catches for 47, so over 100 total yards on 16 touches. He's looking really good since replacing Jedi Knight after week 1. Derek McFadden got involved, 4 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown, so he looked nice. He had some good kick returns, although he fumbled on one of those kick returns. But he's getting more involved. Neil Mason, 5 catches, 78 yards and a touch. Alex A. Cook, 4 catches for 26 yards. David Woodsmall still having a hard time getting their tight end involved. Athletic tight end, guy that can stretch the defense, and they just have not utilized him. Only 3 catches for 7 yards. Defensively, Todd Rainey Jr., 7 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Jerry James continues to be solid with 11 tackles. And Joey Hansen was really the big story on defense as he kept that defense in. 12 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, a sack, and a pick. And got into the Player of the Week nomination. So quick rundown of kind of what all went on in that game. What were your thoughts and takeaways on it for both Florida State and Iowa?
I think the one thing, too, is that Justin Meese kind of has to figure out a way to get going consistently. He's got to be a little consistent kind of going around. They got to figure out a way to kind of balance things out a little bit. I think over the past few weeks, they've been really kind of leaning on Justin Meese. 55 pass attempts to 8 runs with Earlycutt. I mean, I think you kind of want to see how to balance that out a little bit more because we saw Earlycutt's athletic and he can do some damage in space. But for what they did manage to do in terms of the passing game only, McFadden, we saw, his speed and athleticism really kind of jump out. We saw several plays where he burned the defense deep, and you and I kind of looked and said, if Meese can just fit that in there, then, there's 6 points right there. But, he had an off game. I think he can bounce back. But I think we also saw that really the threat of these weapons for Iowa's offense and this wide receiver core. Florida State, on the other hand, they continue to look very balanced and they continue to look very efficient. I think if you're Florida State, you kind of want to see Gonzalez get those picks cleaned up a little bit, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. It's not a great look. I think you kind of want to limit that down, maybe at least a pick a game. If not, no picks. I think that's the ideal dream for everybody, but, just 1 is okay. The domination of that, the control that they had looks very good if you're Florida State, but some of these teams across the league, Boise State, Hawaii, they've looked in control of games as well. So, I mean, Florida State is really kind of up there. I think they're kind of quietly making a name for themselves to be top 4 in the league right now.
You made a good point about Meese and him just missing on a few passes. That game's completely different. I think Woodsmall pointed that out. I think it was in chat. But if Meese had Derek McFadden once or twice on the outside that he just missed, and I think maybe another deep shot to Neil Mason kind of over in the middle. If he completes 1 of those or 2 of those, his stats look a lot different and that game looks a lot different. So working on that. And I don't know if the difference is maybe just taking too many shots, maybe his deep accuracy just not where he wanted, and you got to kind of live with that. Or maybe dial it back a little bit and say, okay, instead of taking these shots, maybe we try to look for some 10 and 15 yard in and out routes and comebacks and try to force it down the field a little bit, but maybe not just take shots at throwing streaks where he's got to throw it and let him run under it a little bit. I don't know. We'll see how they adjust, but it's a good point on that. Florida State, like you said, looked really good. After that week one, they really came out flat. They were understaffed in that game, but they've really picked it up, and they dominated that game too in a lot of ways. 19 first downs to 11. That's a big key stat in how they kind of controlled it. And their time of possession was 22 minutes and 17 seconds to only 13:43 for Iowa. So really impressive performance for Florida State. Looking forward to them moving forward. Iowa, like we talked about, we thought they were a top 4 team. Now we're not sure where they fall. They're definitely in the bottom 4 right now, and they're going to have to turn things around. Like you said, get the running game going, and establish that they're one of the top 4 teams. Which we thought they were after last week, beating Ohio State the way they did. I don't know. I don't know what to make out of Iowa right now. So we'll definitely keep an eye on them. This week's going to be pivotal for a lot of teams. Somebody's going to drop to 1 and 3. They're going to be 1 or 2 teams that go to 3 and 1. So a lot of things are going to kind of shape out this week and give us a better idea of who all these teams are. We'll move along to the next game on Saturday. It's the last game of the day. It was our game of the week. Well, we thought it was going to be. And David's hometown team and also the team that he's in control of, they just didn't show up, for lack of a better term. Week 1, they blow out Florida State, who was understaffed, 31-3, and we thought, okay, Ohio State's the early contender for national champion. They got the early contender for Player of the Year in Jay Smith, and then they're at home against Hawaii, a Hawaii team that was 1 and 1, who we weren't sure they were that good. We thought early on they were, but then they lost to Notre Dame, and then they bounced back last week, against Auburn, team that was understaffed but didn't really put them away. And we're like, how good is Hawaii? I think they came out and showed everybody 49-7. Not a lot to say there. I'm gonna turn it over to you. That's your team. Explain what happened there. I know we talked about it on the broadcast, but now you've had some time to reflect. What happened, and what does that tell us about both teams?
Well, I think the one thing that it tells us is that we got our hopes up very high for Ohio State against an undermanned Florida State team, and we're like, yes, they look very good, and we see why they look very good, because they went up against an undermanned, Florida State defense. Hawaii kind of came out, and we had questions about whether or not they could really take control of the game, and then they could just completely take control against Ohio State and leave no room for error. And we knew that they were going to have a big passing game. We knew Chubba Guts was going to look great in terms of passing. I think the one thing we didn't expect was Hawaii's defense to be able to shut down this running game for Ohio State in the way that they did. And so I think going forward, Hawaii's kind of reestablished themselves. They pick back up kind of where they left off. And they've really kind of shown that, they are in contention with some of these top 4 teams right now. Ohio State, the questions become even larger on what they do. They finally got Bobby Jackson involved. He had 6 catches, 44 yards, which is okay. You'd like to see him be involved in a winning effort. But at the same time, there's a lot to be said in terms of figuring out how to get the most out of these pieces. And just wasn't the right game plan this week.
Yeah, just some stats from that game. Hawaii, 463 yards of offense, 218 for Ohio State. Like you said, they shut down the running game. Ohio State did get 106, but in college, that's just not enough. Jay Smith, 21 of 33, 112 yards and a pick. He had 16 carries for only 37 yards and a touchdown. Aries Lewis, 21 for 69, held to about 3 yards a carry. 10 receptions for only 34 yards. We saw last week, we saw him get involved against Iowa with some big plays in the passing game. It just didn't happen for him. They tried to get him involved, but Hawaii was just very good at swarming all over the field. For Hawaii, Chris Oley looking solid every week. Looks like one of the best players on the field. 11 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss. Had a pass deflection. Just missed out on being included in Player of the Week this week. Larry Taylor Jr. had a big week in week 1 with 3 sacks. Kind of disappeared last week. Showed back up this week. 10 tackles, 2 tackles for a loss. Wes Velo continues to lock down the other team's number one receiver. Bobby Jackson was able to get a few catches in that one, but didn't have much. He had 6 catches for 44 yards. But he just couldn't go anywhere. He made some catches, he just couldn't go anywhere. Wes Velo is just a tough lockdown corner over there. So very impressive game from Ohio State. Mason Ryan, 10 tackles, tackle for a loss, a sack, and a pass deflection. So great defensive performance. We thought they had some holes on defense, but they really closed those up. Tubbeguts, 391 yards of offense, 5 touchdown passes on 27 to 44. So he is blowing away everybody else on the stat department. He's got 1,050 yards on the season already. And the next closest guy was Adric Berry. And I don't have that stat for you, but he had like 790 yards, I think. So he's almost 300 yards ahead of the next guy. So 100 yards a game, which is kind of crazy. So any other takeaways from that game? We know there was some discontention in the locker room. We heard about after the game, some finger pointing maybe going on, a little bit maybe calling out the coach a little bit, maybe questioning the game plan. Where are you guys at? Where are you guys at there? And what are you guys doing to turn it around?
A little bit, the discontent seems to have it's still kind of there, but it seems to have quieted a little bit. There seems to be kind of a calm that has kind of set in. I think the big thing to keep in mind, though, is that we are 3 weeks in. It's still kind of early. Ohio State's still 1-2. There's enough time left, but they got to figure things out, and they got to figure them out fast to be able to really turn things around. And, it's easy to be, in a great mood when you're winning, and when you lose, that adversity and everything, it really kind of shows you who you are. But I'm confident in our guys that, they'll be able to come back together against a really strong Boise team, because they really kind of have to.
Well, it's easy to look like a saint and do all the right things when you're winning and things are going well. But you see the character of people when they hit adversity, and it's gonna be up to see what you guys are made of. You're down kind of against the grain. You guys came out and were talking a lot that first week after that Florida State win, and kind of proclaimed yourself preseason national champions. And now you guys got a long road to hoe and realize it's not as easy as some people want to think. And put it out. We'll see what you guys got. Hopefully, I hope everybody. I know for the league, I don't hope everybody finishes like 4-5, 5-4, because I don't know if that looks good. It's almost too much parity. But I do hope everybody's in it at the end in the last week or two. Everybody's still fighting and clawing for a spot. So I'm not going to say which games I want you guys to win. I hope you guys get back into it, and I hope we see that heart and determination. So going on, the next part is going to be announcing the players of the week. Defensively, this is the closest vote we've ever had. But we'll start with the offense, because this one was kind of a runaway on offense, as we figured it would be. Elliot Tubbeguts of Hawaii wins Offensive Player of the Week. This is 3 straight weeks now that Hawaii has had a Player of the Week. They had Defensive Player of the Week the first 2 weeks, Larry Taylor Jr. and Chris Oley. And this week they get Offensive Player of the Week and Elliot Tubbeguts. Tubbeguts again, 27 to 44, 391, 5 touchdowns and no interceptions. Huge week for him. He also had Lucas Dykes was a nominee with 3 touchdowns. Ace McFrilly had 160 yards receiving. So big offensive game for Hawaii. Defensive Player of the Week, closest vote we've had in 3 weeks. Joey Hansen of Iowa narrowly edges out Luis Vasquez II of Notre Dame, which I think made us both happy, because we both, calling that game, we both saw what a huge impact Joey Hansen, and take nothing away from Lorenzo Vasquez, 6 tackles and 3 sacks, but Joey Hansen was amazing in that game, and a huge reason that Iowa stayed in it. So Hansen, 12 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a sack, and an interception. Huge game for him. So congrats to both of those guys. Comments from you on both of those players and what you saw from those two?
Well, I mean, Tubbeguts really took advantage against that Ohio State secondary. But the one thing to point out about him is that this is the 3rd straight week in a row where he's been in the nominee contention. We saw it last week with his 373-yard stat line. He was up there, in consideration. Same way week 1 in his attempt to come back. Joey Hansen, the one big thing for that Iowa defense is their scheme to utilize him worked. He really set up, some of Todd Rainey Jr. sacks, some of Alvin Mack's, because they brought him off that edge a lot, and that forced the offensive tackle for Florida State to have to pick between blocking Rainey or blocking Joey Hansen, and they did a great job lining him up on the same side as Todd Rainey Jr. So I think that tandem right there, that really works, and if they can keep moving him around to either side in that manner, I think that's going to be something to really kind of give offenses and coaches some headaches.
I agree. Yeah, it's and not to leave out Caleb Tuiasosopo, who was number 3 in the voting this week. Hansen and Tuiasosopo were both huge playmakers in that game. Hansen just was a little bit more involved. It didn't have the 2 forced fumbles, which is really impressive by Tuiasosopo. But like you said, he was everywhere, and definitely exciting to see what they do with Hansen going forward the rest of the year. So on that note, looking forward to the games this week. Auburn and Tennessee is the first one, kicking off Tuesday night at 7. Just make note of the new schedule. Again, will be Tuesday and Thursday nights for the rest of the week, or for the rest of the year. So Tuesday at 7, Auburn and Tennessee kicking off. I just noticed I didn't put the stats in for Auburn and Tennessee on defense, so might have to wing it there. I left that out of the notes. But offensively, these two teams are both really struggling. Auburn comes into the game, averages 16 points a game in offense. Tennessee 17, so they're right there together. They're also 2 of the bottom teams in third down percentage. Tennessee 22%, Auburn 36%. So both of these offenses are struggling. We know Tennessee's defense is great. Auburn's defense has looked better than most expected since they don't have a lot of star power on defense. What do you see from this game? And can we effectively say that whoever loses this game is probably out of it?
I think it's going to depend a little bit in terms of saying whether or not one team is out of it. Remember that Auburn has at least the 1 win, which is something more than what Tennessee has. But I think the thing, too, to remember is that Tennessee did not look bad. Now, offensively, they looked a little kind of concerning, but it was against a better Notre Dame defense as well. I think if they can right the ship this week against a somewhat weaker Auburn defense, they are better than what many of us expected, but they're not as great as some of the defenses that Tennessee has had to contend with. Remember, they had to play against Boise State defense, that Notre Dame defense. Those are some of the top tier ones in the league. Auburn, the thing for them is they just have to have the late game success early on and continue that throughout the rest of the game. That's the big thing for them. It's not a question of whether or not they can get this thing going offensively in particular. It's just whether or not they can get it going for the whole game and be consistent in that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to watch is that second game against Hawaii. We talk about it as Blake Moon looked as good as he's looked, or at least as good as he looked in some of these fourth quarter drives, but he did on the first drive of the game. He had 3 completions and 5 rushes on that first drive, drove them down the field, and then gets hurt inside the 10-yard line. Then Chris Williams has to come in as the backup and replace him. And then we never really got to see what they did. But they went away from it this week. They changed their strategy, and it didn't work out for them. And it will be interesting to see if they go back to what worked for them, at least for that first drive, and for a lot of that game, because Chris Williams looked good running that offense against Hawaii. He just wasn't good enough, right? But they changed it up last week, and I don't think it worked out for them. So it'll be interesting to see if they go back to what worked for a drive, at least against Hawaii, if they can make it work for a full game. So it is interesting. I'm kind of the thought. I think if Tennessee loses, for sure, they're done. I mean, 0-4, they pretty much have to run the table to even get into it. And I don't know if I see that happen. So this is a big game for Tennessee. If Auburn loses and falls to 1-3, they're not done. But considering possibly the toughest part of their schedule is coming up, I don't know. I think whoever loses this game is probably done. Tennessee's still got a long road to hold, even if they win. But we'll see. It's going to be interesting. Auburn can definitely get themselves into it. Tennessee can get themselves into it with a win. So it's going to be a big game for both teams. And kicking off our coverage on Tuesday night, it's going to be a fun one to watch. The second game on Tuesday night, Iowa and Hawaii. This one's interesting for me because you didn't necessarily like it as much as I did when we were talking about it, but this is a game where I think both quarterbacks throw the ball 50 times, and we just see who's the better quarterback. Because we've seen Iowa kind of evolve from a read option kind of team early in week 1, which only put up 14 points and wound up losing in the fourth quarter to Auburn. And then in week 2, they transitioned and they were throwing a lot more, which I think they wanted to do from the start. Still didn't do a whole lot of offense. They were really conservative. They wound up beating Ohio State and dominating that game, but still didn't look like they wanted. Finally, in week 3, they kind of air it out a little bit and do what they wanted to, but they still couldn't get the win and wind up getting beat and kind of manhandled by Florida State. So this week, now they're going up against a Hawaii team that is the best passing team in the league. They probably do what Iowa wants to do better than what Iowa does. So it will be interesting to see if they both just, put the pedal to the metal and say, hey, who's going to win? Or does Iowa change it up and go back to what happened in week 1? How do you see it shaking out?
I don't know that Iowa goes back to kind of what they did in week 1, but I also don't know that you want to ask Justin Meese to take a lot of shots downfield, especially considering the fact that this week he couldn't hit home on some of those deep throws. The missed shots to Derek McFadden deep and to Neil Mason, and maybe they try that again. But this is probably the best secondary that Iowa has faced all season. And so that gives pause. That kind of makes you stop and say, do we really want to try and go over aggressive or, take a lot of deep shots against this really strong secondary? The problem for that, though, is, too, that we just saw Hawaii shut down an Ohio State running game that we thought was going to get its wheels back this week. So it kind of comes down, how balanced does Hawaii need to be able to be successful, and how is that going to look? If you're going to ask Justin Meese to take those kinds of shots, you're also playing kind of towards the strength of that Hawaii defense. So that gives you some concern. Is that your strength right now, is this Iowa offense? It certainly looks that way on paper in terms of the roster with the wide receiver core and Meese as your quarterback. But from what we've seen translate onto the field, it hasn't quite looked like their absolute strength. It looked better, but I don't know as we can really say that as an absolute strength for this Iowa offense. For Hawaii, I think you just kind of got to stick with what's been keeping you going this far, which is Tubba passing at 50 yards, or 50 times and, going for almost 400 yards for the past couple weeks. I think that's going to continue. However, Iowa's secondary is pretty good too, especially if they're going to bring Joey Hansen down into the box again. That might open things up to keep Tubba under pressure.
Well, the funny thing about that is we have it. Notre Dame in week 1 was pretty aggressive. Now, granted, they have 2 defensive ends that can create a lot of havoc. We haven't really seen anybody threaten Tubba like they did in week 1. And Iowa was pretty aggressive last week with the blitzes, and they also have 2 really good defensive ends. So, with that with Hansen coming out of the box and coming in on blitzes with Rainey and Alvin Mack out there on the edge, this is going to be real similar to that Notre Dame team that beat them defensively. They don't quite have the star power in the back 7 that Notre Dame does, but they've got 2 really good ends and a safety that's a playmaker. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out and how that affects Hawaii, because that's a real similar scheme to what gave them their first loss. On the flip side, that Hawaii secondary is something else. You got Wes Velo, Danny Polamalu, DeAndre Spires, Kellen McLaughlin, Mason Ryan, all back there. If Meese is going to throw those, and just miss on those long, if he leaves one short, those guys are going to come up with it. So, like you said, it will be interesting to see if Iowa just says, this is what we want to do, prove you can beat us, or if they want to kind of take a page out of Notre Dame's book and say, hey, our defense looks kind of like Notre Dame's. We can do some of the things that Notre Dame could do. Let's try to, bring an attack that Notre Dame did and see if we can, edge out a close win. So definitely going to be interesting to see how both of those teams respond this week and what they come out with. Whoever wins that game, well, I guess if Iowa wins, they'll be 2-2, and both teams will be 2-2. But they put themselves back in the contention of being a top 4 team, especially knocking off Hawaii, which I think we'll all say is the number 2 team in the league right now behind Boise. If Iowa can knock them off, then we got questions there again. So definitely going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. Moving on to Thursday's games. First game on Thursday night, I don't know what to expect. When we first set up the schedule, this looked like a game that we were going to be excited about, and now I got no idea. I mean, Boise State, maybe they should be favored by 17. You said that earlier. I don't know what we're going to do with this one. Ohio State goes to Boise on the Smurf turf, coming off a 49-7 loss to Hawaii. I think we all think that Boise, all around, at least through the first 3 weeks, is the number one team. So if you get beat that bad by the number two team, how bad are you going to lose to the number one team? I don't know what to make of it. It's your team. You're involved in it. Hard to be unbiased, I guess. But what do you expect to see in this one?
No, I think Boise should be favored. I think the one thing though, Ohio State.
You think they should be favored? Is there even a question in that?
I mean, I only think that they should be favored. I mean, I don't know what to guarantee.
The question is by how much.
Well, I mean, is 20 too much? If we say that they should be favored by 20, is that over pushing it a little? How modest should we be against an Ohio State team that lost by 42? I mean, is 20 too much to put up there? But I think at the same time, though, too, is Boise – what is Boise's plan of attack going to be? Because Ohio State's front six is pretty good. Now, I don't know if it's going to be enough to stop this spread option game that Boise's been running over the past couple weeks. But does Boise try to air it out a little bit against a weaker secondary? I mean, and what happens if Ohio State takes a page out of Iowa's playbook and moves some of their secondary pieces around to bring somebody down to the box? Do they try to do that? Do they try to just, go straight up, 3-3-5 against this Boise State offense? I think that might be a viable option that they try as well. The offensive side. Are you giving
away hints to your game plan, David?
What?
Are you giving away hints to your game plan?
I wouldn't call it hints. I would call it possibilities. Offensively, though, the thing for Ohio State is figuring out what needs to be done to be successful. Are they going to try and just roll out another running attack and really rely on that? Do they try to do something different? Are they going to try to be balanced, or are they going to go swinging with the fences with Jay Smith in terms of asking him to throw it a little bit more? And how aggressive or how conservative is that going to look? How much do they really trust him to air it out downfield or not?
You're scared to death to let him throw the ball, aren't you? Be honest. You're scared to death to let Jay Smith throw the ball.
I'm scared to let him throw it downfield consistently. I'll put it that way. I'm scared to let him do what Justin Meese was trying to do this past week in terms of a bunch of deep shots. We'll see how we try and get him to take some more shots downfield, but I don't know we're going to ask him to throw it 55 times either. So we'll see.
That would be something to see, and that would surprise Boise. I would imagine.
Well, does anything surprise Boise anymore? I mean, if you're Boise and you look at that and you say Jay Smith throw it 50 times against us, does that really scare you? Would that scare you?
No, because Boise already knows what you're going to do, and you haven't even figured out. I look at these matchups every week, and Boise knows what every team is going to do before that team even knows what they're going to do. So you're going to have to get really creative. I told you this the other day. You're going to have to think of what you want to do, and then think, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to think of what I'm going to do this, and then you're going to have to change it again and be like, okay, I'm not going to do either one of those because they're already going to know I'm going to do this. So I'm going to do something crazy, like how Jay Smith throw for 50 times. Otherwise, Boise's going to know exactly what you're doing, and you're SOL. So. You're really going to have to come up with something special this week, I think.
Yeah. It's gonna have to be if Ohio State pulls this off and they knock off Boise State, it will be the single greatest magic trick of my career. I might retire on the spot if that happens.
Well, in that case, I hope you lose so you can keep going.
I mean, if I knock off Boise State, I might just say, look. I have accomplished the greatest aspect of my life. There's nothing more I can accomplish that will be as great as what just happened. I might be able to pull that off.
It will definitely be the greatest upset in CFSL history, all 4 weeks of it. But that's one I don't know if we'll ever see trumped. If you guys can pull this one off, I don't know if we'll have a bigger spread than this one. It'll be hard to. So definitely be interesting. Some stats on that game. Boise coming into the game. It's 29.7 points per game, which is second behind Hawaii. They average 409 yards per game, which is first. So a really impressive offense. Ohio State, on their hand, 18.7 points. So just right there, Boise's offense scores 11 points more per game. So I would think that the spread's going to be at least 11 points. Defensively, Ohio State gives up 7 points per game more than Boise does. So I don't know, 18-point spread. That's what we're looking at. So that's what you're up against. I'm looking at this trying to think, giving any other perspective on it. I don't know. I really don't know what to expect from this game because Ohio State, we thought if they went back to the running game from week one that it would be successful against Hawaii. That didn't happen. They haven't, outside of week one, which it was just really against an understaffed Florida State team that they looked really good. And you guys are kind of missing an identity, and you guys are going to have to find one this week. And, maybe it is doing something crazy and, taking a bunch of shots downfield. I don't know. All I know is, like I said, you're going to have to figure out something real crazy. Otherwise, Burns and that Boise State team is going to be in your head and in your backfield. So looking forward to it, though. That's our first game on Thursday. And then the final game on Thursday, we didn't know what to expect from this one early on, but this one's shaping up to be a pretty good game. Notre Dame and Florida State. So Florida State rebounding from that first loss, won 2 in a row. They're 2-1. Notre Dame's 2-1. The winner of this game is top 3 in the league at worst. So gonna be interesting to see. Notre Dame coming into the game 26.7 points per game, third in the league. They've been a top 3 offense all along. 392 yards of offense. So they're right up there. They also average 202 rushing yards per game, which is second in the league to Boise. So their run game is really good. Mostly David Woods. Ty White has moments, but their running game is really good, which is going to be kind of interesting since we haven't seen Florida State's run defense tested very much. Florida State, on the other hand, been kind of balanced. We see Michael Kovach had 220 yards total offense, just pounded the ball against an Iowa run defense, which is really good. And I still think the best in the league, regardless of what happened in that game. So, going to be interesting to watch. Both defenses are kind of in the middle of the league. Notre Dame's giving up 28.3 points per game. Florida State 25.3, but obviously they looked a lot better the last 2 weeks. So how do you see that one shaking out, Dave?
Well, I mean, there's 2 key numbers I think that are really jumping out at me as I look at this. Notre Dame offensively is converting on third down about 50% of the time. Florida State is allowing teams to convert about 40% of the time. Florida State offensively, they're converting about 36. Notre Dame is allowing 24%. So in third down conversions, Florida State has their work cut out for them. They got to figure out, 1, how to convert, and 2, how to stop Notre Dame offensively. Other numbers that jump out to me is that Notre Dame offensively is giving up 19 sacks. They've given up 19 sacks on the season. Florida State has only given up 7. And defensively, Notre Dame is generating 11 sacks, and Florida State has generated 8. So, again, there's that disparity right there, that those 2 numbers in terms of sacks and third down conversion are really kind of the big keys that are separating these 2 teams. However, I think Florida State looks better than what that third down conversion number is showing.
I don't know. I hadn't really studied that stat until you pointed that out. I'm like, man, that's an impressive stat. Florida State only 36% conversion on third down. Notre Dame's allowing only 24%. And their defense hasn't been that great. We didn't think. But on third down, for some reason, they step it up on third down. So that's going to be telling. That's really going to be telling to see if Florida State can turn it around, and up their percentage against the best third down defense in the league. So definitely going to be interesting. For as far as a perspective, as far as, Kovach, he had a great game. Notre Dame allowing 137 yards on the run, which is, right at what Florida State's averaging, 138. Is Kovach going to get going, or are we going to see Elias Gonzalez actually do something different and jump out and, show, part of what made him, one of the premier quarterbacks in the league? Or what are we going to see from, both of these teams schematically, and what's going to ultimately decide the game?
Well, I think for Florida State, I think the one thing we can count on is what we've seen to this point, which is balance. Get Kovach going, that sets up Gonzalez, that lets him going. I think the one thing for Notre Dame, though, is what are you going to try to open up? What do you want your success to come in? Do you want it to come in the run game? I mean, 202 yards running would dictate that. However, they're only passing for about 170 yards a game, actually a little less than that, 189.7. And so I think from that perspective, that's a little bit concerning, especially for Notre Dame. If you look at Florida State defensively, they're only giving up a little over 110 yards in terms of rushing. So if Notre Dame's going to struggle to run the ball, defensively, in terms of pass defense for Florida State, they're giving up 250 yards through the air. Notre Dame's giving up 236 passing yards. So I think Florida State has an opportunity. Gonzalez has an opportunity to get rolling a little bit if they can get Kovac going as well. That balance that we have seen, I think that's really Florida State's identity. But if you're Notre Dame, you look at those numbers and you say, are we going to try and run at this Florida State defense, or do we want to try and take advantage of that pass defense?
Let's get away from the numbers. Let's start talking stats. I think we're overwhelming those stats. Let's get rid of the stats. Let's look at the players. Players on the team. David Woods. David Woods going out there against Dewey Eggs at middle linebacker. You got Jack Frost in the secondary. You got Gage Bodine. Lorenzo Vasquez. I can't think of the other defensive end's name. Help me out, David. Tyson Ali, I know, is at defensive tackle.
Tyson Ali is your defensive
tackle. Why can't I think
there.
of it? Devontae Griffin. Devontae Griffin at the other defensive end. So players versus players. Let's get out of the stats. Who cares about stats? Players versus players. Who's gonna show out in this game, and who's gonna really decide it?
Well, I think the matchup, though, if you look in terms of Florida State offensively versus this Notre Dame defense, it's really going to come down to Brandon Lawson and whichever defensive end he matches up against. Is Brandon Lawson going to be able to neutralize one of these defensive ends, whether it's Griffin or Vasquez? I think that's something to watch for, to be able to kind of help out Florida State and help out Michael Kovac get going, and especially protect Gonzalez, especially if they want to try and take shots downfield. But keep in mind, Tyler Smith is back there in that secondary for Notre Dame. He's kind of faded into the woodwork a little bit. I think he's going to try and step back up this week. But at the same time, if you're Notre Dame, get Gage Bodine going. Florida State's secondary is giving up 250 yards through the air. Frost has looked good. He looked good against Iowa. But I think Gage Bodine kind of trying to attack him in that middle of the field, especially at the seams. I think that's going to be something to watch. And I think Bodine can get the better of Frost in that situation. I think he can.
Oh, he's definitely one of the better receivers in the league. We just haven't seen it yet. At least he's got the potential to be. He's got, he's a 4-star receiver. So we'll see how it plays out. I think it's a good point about Brandon Lawson taking on one of those. As it's been the first 3 weeks, it'd be Devontae Griffin that he's on. Lorenzo Vasquez comes off the other side, but you never know if they switch that up. Maybe try to get Griffin going, or maybe Vasquez has another big game. But we haven't seen Notre Dame play a team that could potentially neutralize one of those guys, and that could definitely change things up. They also have a center. They also have a center in there that they got 2 offensive linemen. They're the only team that's got two offensive linemen. So that could completely change it. If they neutralize Tyson Ali a little bit and Devontae Griffin, that changes that defense, and it will definitely open up some things. That's something that Notre Dame's going to have to look forward to. So I see something popping in your head. Did you get another thought when I pointed that out?
Well, I mean, yeah, and that's a big thing. If you're Florida State and you can take away 2 pieces on this front 7 for Notre Dame, that opens up Michael Kovac. That helps him get going because you get past that first line of defense. And then at that point, you have to rely on your linebackers if you're Notre Dame. We've seen Bobby Slovak make some plays. We've seen Justin Philhart get involved. But if that's the matchup, I have to think that if you're Florida State, let Kovac loose. Let him run loose against this front 7 for Notre Dame. And I think if that starts happening, Gonzalez gets rolling. He can start attacking Tyler Smith and attacking downfield this secondary that consists of, Tanner Hendricks, Trey Elijah, Antoine Curry. I think if you get Gonzalez going and you can suck that defense up a little bit, that opens up the passing lane behind him.
It's a good point. I mean, like we said, Notre Dame or Iowa's defense very similar to Notre Dame. One difference is they have the stud linebacker and Jerry James in the middle, which you have more of a balance spread out of linebackers in Notre Dame. But Lawson did a good job out there on Alvin Mack last week. It helped create holes for Kovac, he only averaged like 4.2 yards per carry, but they just pounded it. And you would think they'd be able to have that same kind of success against Notre Dame. So definitely going to be interesting to see how it plays out. The last segment of the show today, we want to address some questions. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. I posted it out there earlier. Nobody sent me any specifically, so I do want to touch on a few things that came up. And I had reached out to 2 or 3 guys per team just to kind of, see where they're at, see if they had any suggestions, anything that they really like, anything they want to improve, and a few things that came up that I wanted to touch on just so everybody's kind of on the same page, full transparency. The first thing was two-way players, and two-way players is something that we are considering. The major sticking point against two-way players is that in real college football, it doesn't happen very often. Miles Jack's the last person I can think of that was two-way player, at least significant one. They happen occasionally, but not very often. So the other part of it is, does it take away some of the strategy? With only having 12-star players, assuming you use them all on your starting 22, that leaves you 10 walk-ons that are starting. And that's a strategy that plays into where do you want to have those holes with your walk-ons in your starting lineup. Obviously, 5 of them on the offensive line for most teams, but as we're seeing with Florida State, they've got 2 offensive linemen out there, and they're starting to roll with them. So does that play a role? If you have too many two-way players, then those holes start to diminish. And then I think we have less diversity between the teams. And that's what we're trying to prevent. So it might be like, an upgrade or something that we can do. It might be we give one or two players per team. We don't know. We're looking at it. It's something that's on our radar, something that we're considering. And so it's definitely something, we'll address probably going in the next season. We don't know how yet, but it is on our radar. Trying to think of a couple of other things that popped up. Shows. Another thing was shows. We have this podcast. I know David and Burns have been in talks about having another kind of show. Something that popped up was like having a pregame show, kind of like a college game day kind of thing. Which I've thought about a pregame show if we did like a 30-minute pregame to kind of help get guys acclimated and ready to go. That's something that we can look at with shows. The thing that plays into those is the production time. Not only for prepping for it, what we're going to talk about, what we're going to cover, but are we going to do any kind of graphics for it? Are we going to do any kind of video? So it's not that they can't be done. It's just we're having to balance how much time we have. David has liked to say this to me a lot this week, is that he's our first unpaid employee. So for that matter, I'm an unpaid employee too. So we want to balance our time expenditure versus what we're getting out of it. If a lot of people are tuning in and it's a really good tool that people are loving, then we want to do it. But if it's something like the Sports Center type show that we did after week 1, that took me like 10 to 12 hours just to edit and create graphics for. And we had like 20 some people that showed up for it, which was great. But I think about the same amount show up for the podcast and go back and listen to it. So it didn't make sense to spend 10 to 12 hours editing video and doing graphics when we can get the same content value from a podcast like this. So something that we're definitely looking at, player interviews and stuff like that. David, I see you got something that you wanted to add to that, so I'll let you do that before we move on. Your face is so easy to read.
It is. You've gotten so used to my pauses and the way I breathe when I prepare to say something. But I think the one thing you talk about, like all the graphics and everything, consider this our plea to the masses right now. If there's some of you who like to do graphics or you know how to do graphics, feel free to submit graphics, to us, and we can, talk about utilizing them in some way. That would cut into some of the production time a lot. If that were to happen. So throw that out there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, don't just create them and then say, hey, use them. Talk to us. Send me a message and say, hey, I'm good at it. Here's some examples of what I've done. What can you help? And then I can send it out there and talk about it. I'm trying to think of a couple other things that we ran out of time to put all these in the notes. And I was hoping we'd get some other questions from some of the members, but I know one of the other things that was brought up was talking about our subscription levels, and that talking about adding in trophies and stuff like that, awards. So awards is definitely something that we want to expand on. I know initially we were just going to do like a player of the year, like an MVP type of thing, but I think like an offensive and defensive player of the year is the right way to go with that. So we'll add that in. And then we also want to do an All-American team, an offensive and defensive All-American team, which I think will be a lot of fun for guys. I don't know that that's necessarily going to get anything, but it'll be an award that I think we can put out there, and that everybody can maybe we'll put like on somebody's display All-American or something like that on their display name. But one of the comment that was kind of made with that was that we have revenue, so we should be able to do things like this. And so I just want to touch on that because I want everybody to kind of know how it works, just so they understand. We brought in revenue, and we had more people sign up for 5-star than we were initially anticipating, which was awesome. But there is we're still in the red overall. It costs $100 for our stat service that we use to put on the website, which I'm still trying to figure out and utilize completely. Our theme for our website was $65. Our web server every month is $65 a month. And I've also spent, I haven't added up the exact total, but I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 on advertising to get our name out there, and to get people that are outside of the Facebook group that we are on, or outside of my Twitter circle, to try to get new people in and to find out about us. And so that's an ongoing cost. So all that stuff, like, we're still way in the red. It's going to take us another month or two to get into the black. And then at some point, we want to expand upon things. But I just wanted to put that out there so everybody kind of understood, like, it's not typically a league that, like a regular Madden league, like you might have everybody pay $20 and then you all put it out into like a pool or something like that. There's a lot that goes on. There's a lot of effort that's put in there. David puts in a lot of time. The last few weeks, I've been spending 50, 60 hours a week working on things. We've got sliders that we're still testing. We want to make sure the sliders produce the best gameplay possible, and we want to make sure that our stars are differentiated from 5 stars and 3 stars are differentiated, 3 stars from walk-ons. So we're putting a ton of time into testing sliders. There's also a new thing that we want to do going in the next season to help people customize their player better and help people understand the kind of player that they're building, and that's going to take a ton of time for going in and adjusting. So we're looking at it. We want to do more things. And we're just and grow, but as that stuff comes in, it lets us do more things, and eventually, maybe I can buy David a Snickers or something and say thanks for the time he's put in, and maybe I can get a McDonald's meal or something out of it. But we're just keep working at it. We're working hard behind the scenes, even though you only see 2 nights of broadcasts and 1 podcast. There's a ton of time that's going in behind the scenes that we're putting in to try to put the best product out there, and we're going to continue to do that. So I'm going to scroll through the chat, David. If you got any other questions or comments on that, feel free to add them. I'm going to look through the chat real quick.
The one thing that Mike has not addressed, he mentioned the pay and everything and all the behind-the-scenes stuff. He and I have spent hours on the phone. He has spent hours with Neil Wormreaver on the phone. He spent hours with Woodsmall on the phone. I know he's spent some time with Pack on the phone, just talking about all this, and we work out plans and we try and figure things out. He and I have spent time on Sims just trying to work things out in terms of sliders. He's done that with Pack and with Woodsmall a little bit, Wormreaver as well. So we're spending more time trying to figure things out than we can in terms of actual production and entertainment value. But I think as we start getting things really squared away and saying, yes, this is exactly where we want it, this is where we need to be, we've seen enough consistency that we can start going back towards the entertainment value that you guys want. But for what it is and for what it is right now, I think this is good enough to keep guys entertained, to keep you guys entertained and joining us. So bear with us as we get the finer details ironed out and figured out, and the new system kind of getting put together as we go forward into season 2.
That's a good point too about everybody else. You are involved a lot because we're on broadcast together, so we talk a lot about that, and you have a lot of free time too, so you like talking CFSL. So we do that. But like you said, Neil's busy with work and a family, but he still has contributed. Neil is Wormreaver, for those that don't know. we've spent tons of time on the phone talking, and we spent a couple hours the other day talking about something for season 2, which I think everybody would be excited about. Wood Small, like you said, I talk to every day pretty much. Nighthawk I've been on the phone with. Brocco I've been on the phone with. Pack I talk to pretty consistently. Burns I don't talk to as much. I know he's busy with school and stuff, but we've had conversations. So all of your ADs are working hard to bring out the best product that we can give. We're still early in our first season. Things are going to change. We're going to get better. We're going to improve. We're going to try to add more. And the more that other guys help out, we talked about it before. If we can have multiple broadcast crews, then that frees up time. If both of us, especially next season when we add hopefully 4 new teams, we'll probably Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for broadcast. Well, the 2 of us don't want to do 3 nights in a row of broadcast. So if we can find another play-by-play crew to do Wednesday night or whatever, that's going to help out. And like you said, graphics and stuff like that. It's all a team process. And we're bringing in some revenue, and eventually we'll get to a point where we can do more cool stuff with that, and maybe help people that are contributing. But right now, it's grassroots effort. Just trying to get out there, and as much help as guys want to provide, then the better. That'll help us out and help us do things. So we definitely appreciate any help that we get, and we'll look at things. Also we've mentioned having like beat writers and stuff like that. So anybody likes to write, want to do season or the game previews or do game recaps, which we don't have other than the podcast, stuff like that would be cool. So you guys let us know if you're interested in helping, and hopefully that kind of shed some light on some things. Again, apologize for the late start. I think we figured out what our issue is going forward, and we won't have that pop up again. So, tomorrow night, Tuesday, 7 o'clock, just less than 24 hours from now is our first game. So you guys be sure to tune in for that. I'm sure it's going to be a great one. And I think we're gonna have a great week of games. So we appreciate you guys all tuning in. David, as always, thank you for contributing and being such a big part of this. And all the guys that were in the chat that tuned in: Boz, Clutch, Frosty, Let's Zeke Eat, which I believe is G Bodine, Superwoman, Worm Reaver, Shout Gamers, James 7, Commander Root, Burns. Pack I saw in there, Woodsmall I saw in there. Anybody that we're missing, we apologize, but definitely appreciate you guys all tuning in and supporting us every week in all of our broadcasts. It definitely means a lot, and keeps us going every week. So until tomorrow night, 7 o'clock for our first game, and it's I already forget. I get all these going through my head, but Auburn and Tennessee, followed by Iowa and Hawaii, should be 2 great games tomorrow night. So you guys tune in. We'll see you then. And for David, I'm Mike Peters. We'll see you next time.